Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning and welcome to our Government Spotlight event at your Columbus Chamber of Commerce. I'm Don DePero, your president and CEO of the Chamber. Thank you all so very much for joining us this morning. And a very special thanks to our program partner and our sponsor this morning, and that's Spectrum. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our great friend, our Government Affairs Steering Committee member, Tamara Howard, the Manager of Government Affairs for Charter Communications. Tamara.
Good morning, everyone. As Don said, I'm Tamara Howard, Manager of Government Affairs for Charter Communications. Charter Communications is a leading connectivity company and cable operator providing superior broadband, voice, video, and mobile services under the brand name Spectrum. We employ more than 7,900 employees and provide service to more than 1,900 communities right here in Ohio. As a longtime partner and supporter of the Columbus Chamber, I am thrilled to be here to kick off this morning's program. While childcare matters to the business community, today, we will learn more about how the business community and local chambers of commerce have critical roles to play in the discussion around public investments in childcare. They are uniquely positioned to highlight the broad economic benefits and market advantages of increased public investment. Our panelists will share their insights and perspectives on why the business community needs access to affordable and reliable high-quality childcare, not only because it helps parents be better at their jobs, but it helps businesses' bottom line. I now have the pleasure of introducing Des Bryant, Vice President of Government Relations with the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. Des?
Thank you, Tamara, and thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. Child care is not just a family issue, it's a business issue. It affects how we work, when we work, and for many, why we work. Studies have shown that a family-friendly workplace improves employee productivity, morale, and retention, and in some cases, or in many cases, helps businesses recruit the best workers. Furthermore, access to high-quality, affordable childcare means more employment and higher incomes for working parents. At the end of the day, early childhood education is one of the best investments we can make, not just in a child's future, but for our region. To kick off the program, I want to introduce our moderator, Colin Page McGinnis, Chief Executive Officer for Sprout 5. Thank you so much, Colin, and to our panelists for joining us today. Colin, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Des. I want to thank the Chamber for hosting this conversation. I think we have all heard through and post-pandemic the impact that childcare has on our ability to engage in work and redefine what the workplace is going to look like going forward. For those of you unfamiliar, Sprout 5 has been around since 1922. For over 100 years, we have been in the business of early education, predominantly on the south end of Columbus. Over the past year, has been expanding our footprint to ensure every child benefits from holistic, high-quality early education. Where our work differs from most is we take an approach around co-locating. So that means we're going in and partnering with nonprofit hubs, education institutions, affordable housing, and I think most applicable to this conversation, employers, to ensure that we're meeting parents and families where they are and helping them attain their needs. I'm super excited to have Sydney and Kelsey join us on the conversation today and bringing their perspectives of how they're incorporating childcare into both their business and the economic prosperity of the city of Whitehall. Sydney McBride is the Executive Director of Ohio Living Westminster Thurber. She's been with Ohio Living for 8 years and transitioned to Westminster Thurber in January 2021 from another campus. Sydney oversees the overall operations of campus, ensuring approximately 380 plus seniors who live there can live their best lives, and that the 150 plus staff who work there are empowered to provide high quality care. She is dedicated to those that she serves as a colleague, client, and neighbor. Her personal drive makes a positive difference in her organization, encompasses her for larger purpose to make a positive difference in the entire community. Cindy has her master's in healthcare administration, is a licensed nursing home administrator, and a certified professional in aging services risk management. She is a 2023 graduate of Leadership Columbus and a member of the Schumacher Place Civic Association. Kelsey Miller serves as the City of Whitehall's Economic Development Manager. She helps retain existing industry and helps attract new development opportunities to the city. With that, she plays a hand in understanding the wraparound services that come with bringing a new development, especially to challenged areas. Prior to her role in Whitehall, she practiced economic development for the city of Delaware, Ohio, as well as Delaware County. We're going to jump right into the conversation here. We have a few questions that we planned, but if the conversation takes us a different route, we're going to go ahead and ride with that to ensure that we have the opportunity to fully cover the conversation that we're looking at today. So Sydney, I'm going to start with you. Can you briefly tell us about the journey that you've taken so far to establish on-site childcare at Ohio Living Westminster Thurber? And if you could talk a little bit, tell me about what inspired you to actually take this journey and come to the decision that childcare is something you should be thinking about as an employer.
Absolutely. So like any employer, senior living was impacted by the pandemic. In fact, here in the state of Ohio, we lost about 15,000 senior living workers through the pandemic. So as my team kind of came to the table and was troubleshooting our recruitment and retention woes, it became apparent that transportation, childcare, and housing were kind of three main barriers that really all of us employers are experiencing. And so in October of 2021, we launched a pilot program to provide COTA bus passes to our teammates. And that was wildly successful. So we were like, okay, well, we're going to keep that pilot going, but what's the next thing we can kind of take a stab at? And so childcare rose to the top. And so one of my wonderful board members connected me with Colin and Sprout 5. And so we began our conversations in January of 2022. And through those conversations, I learned a lot about childcare. That's obviously not my area. I'm on the other end of the spectrum. It became apparent that childcare on campus was probably the best move for us because we had this COTA bus pass program going, and adding one more stop on their bus route on their way to work to drop a child off at a childcare center was probably not going to add to their work efficiency. And that's really what we were trying to support. So we have explored quite a few different locations on my campus for childcare and finally settled on one. And so now I guess we just got the quote from a contractor on the renovations that need to take place. And my gift planner and we are a not-for-profit, so we are currently in the space of developing a fundraising plan for that project.
Awesome. And as we move forward and have this conversation, I just want to throw out right now, if senior living and childcare can figure out all the red tape and hoops you have to jump through to make this happen, I think any employer can figure out how to bring childcare to their campus. Because reciprocating sides here, we have learned so much about the rules and regulations in the senior living side and trying to make this become a reality. And I'm excited to have you throughout the conversation today, bring that perspective of your past year or so in bringing childcare to reality for your employees. But before we dive too far into that, Kelsey, I want to ask you, from your perspective as Economic Development Manager of Whitehall, why is childcare becoming increasingly essential as employers are thinking about their next steps in their economic journey? Because childcare is not new. So what's been changing in your perspective, and why is this becoming less and less of a family conversation and more of an economic conversation?
Sure. So in Whitehall, like you said, this is really not a new conversation. Whitehall actually leads the county in single mother-led households. At 49% of our students that go home are going to a single parent household. We keep up with different statistics to make sure that we're serving our residents in the best way possible. We do a community attitude survey every 2 years with an outside consultant to get a sample of our population. And one of the big takeaways that we got this last year in this past spring was that one of the main reasons for underemployment in our community is childcare, that and lack of education resources. So we pay extra close attention to these things. And like I said, this isn't a new problem for our residents, but I think with COVID lifestyles, employees have more expectations now. We have costs are rising in every way. So one of the big things that COVID-19 did was at least supply more time to childcare for parents, which was a huge money saver. So what this is a huge thing that we are pushing our employers to consider, with whether that's either connecting them to, or giving breaks to their employees for childcare, or kind of moving, or even taking that extra step of doing that in-house childcare. So with it all is a wraparound service, and we're seeing more employers take more of that stock in understanding what those wraparound services mean for the retention ultimately.
Yeah, so when I came into Sprout 5 in 2018, I was very fortunate that we were already located at the Reeve Avenue Center, which really took wraparound services to a new level. But as we thought about expanding the operations that we have within our organization and how we were going to grow, the reason co-locating came to be was this understanding that particularly for a lot of frontline workers, for those that are maybe making at or just above minimum wage, when you take into account things like housing and transportation, which Sydney brought up, if you're leaving your apartment to get the childcare on time, you're gonna have to leave at like 6:30, 7 o'clock, so you can take the bus if you're taking CODA and get your child to drop off. I know for my two kiddos, drop off never takes the 10 minutes that I want it to take. Then you have to, try to be at your workplace by 8 o'clock. You do your shift on the back end. You have to pick up before childcare closes. And if you need access to food, or if you're going to need to go to a doctor's appointment, those places typically aren't open at 6 p.m. at night. So when we looked at this co-locating approach, and why we're so excited about it, is when you start bringing all these services together, and you start taking your employment and your childcare as the same route, you get to put a little bit more family time back into the family's day, and you get to remove some of those barriers. Instead of 3 buses that you're taking to get to work, you're having 1 leg of transportation. So I think the thing that we're seeing now, which maybe was something that was isolated to the realities of low to moderate income families in Columbus before the pandemic, has escalated a bit more. And we're seeing it as a demand on the employer side of things. You need to start helping out with some of these wraparound services, which it sounds like you're also hearing, Kelsey, on the Whitehall side of things. Sydney, I want to jump back to you a little bit though. You talked about recruitment and retention as part of the reasons you were interested in exploring childcare and doing things like your awesome CODA pilot. I was wondering from the employer perspective, if you could talk a little bit more about what you think will actually happen, because we're in that build out phase right now. But what are you expecting to see when on-site childcare is available to your employees at Ohio Living Westminster Thurber?
Yeah, so back in 2022, we surveyed all of our teammates. I think it was about February, just to even gauge like how many have children of this age. Is it really, and we think it's a need, is it really truly a need? And we got lots of surveys back, went through all the data, and it was very apparent that it was in fact a need. And so I think that meeting that need is going to increase the retention of our current teammates, because they're getting, like Kelsey mentioned, these wraparound services, the CODA bus pass, the childcare on site, and anything that we can do as an employer to really just wrap our arms around our teammates and support them so that they can continue providing the high quality care that we provide to our elders. But then I think too, as we build out that wraparound service, being able to kind of share that in any of our recruitment materials, it might be the difference between a caregiver going down the street or a caregiver coming to us. As a not-for-profit, we try to be as competitive as we can with our wages, but sometimes our for-profit competitors just kind of sneak right past us. But if we're offering some of these other services and supports, that might be kind of the tipping point from a recruitment perspective that will have that caregiver come and join our community.
Yeah, as crazy as it sounds, childcare was not a benefit. Full paid childcare was not a benefit at Sprout 5 until this past year or so. And as soon as we made that shift to offer completely paid for childcare for our employees, the number of applicants that we saw has gone through the roof. We've been able to fill kind of the gaps that we had in our recruitment efforts. And that is not the case for most providers. So if any of you listening to the call here have kids in childcare, you've probably seen quite a bit of turnover over the pandemic in terms of teachers, and maybe rooms have closed, which is an added layer, I think, to this whole conversation, which is the supply of childcare that our employees were accessing before isn't the same supply as it was 3 years ago today. So there is this extra layer that we have to think about if we're going to be able to provide childcare for employees. Sydney, you talked a little bit about the survey that you did with your staff. And I know my research team, Center for Early Childhood Innovation, has offered to employers the ability to conduct a survey for their HR departments to look at their workforce. And I think sometimes that sounds scarier than it needs to be. You did your survey in-house. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what did you actually ask your employees? What did that look like? How did that go? And sorry, Sydney, I'm going off script here, but I think it's important to highlight the asking to gain interest and insight doesn't maybe have to be as complicated as some may think when assessing other types of benefits like health insurance, dental, vision, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, I mean, for us in this community, we have a culture of really knowing our teammates and really listening and asking the questions. And so rolling out a survey for us was not a very daunting task. But some of the things that we asked was just very simply like, do you have children? Yes or no? If so, what are the ages? Do your children utilize daycare, formal daycare or formal child care services? Yes or no? And then a space for, if no, what options are you using? And then if high quality early childhood education was available on campus, would it be something you would utilize? So we tried to keep it short. And what was super surprising to me back in February of 2022, we got all of our teammates to respond, and not a single one of my teammates used a formal childcare service. And so on the little section of like, okay, what options are you using? It was family, it was friends, it was neighbors. And so when we're looking at that data, it directly correlates to their attendance, their morale, and all of the things that impact their work performance when they don't have a solid, professional childcare location to go to. If their mother is supposed to be watching, a mother gets called into work, or maybe mother gets sick, that impacts them directly. So.
And then another thing we kind of layered on top because of the crossover and partnership with Sprout 5 was we took a look, I think from your team's perspective, I don't even think you actually dug into the employee side of, given the population that we serve and some of the high level hourly wage and hours type situation, we're able to pretty quickly take a look and say, hey, this subset would qualify for publicly funded and they're not utilizing that. So that's really low hanging fruit. And then this population doesn't quite, but what things can we do there? So I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that end, but it was then really easy, I think, for us from a partnership perspective to take a look and say, oh yeah, this makes sense. There's a need here, and there's some really low hanging fruit that can make this viable.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of round out that conversation, yeah, we do have some teammates who would qualify for, public assistance in the form of childcare, and then some of our teammates who wouldn't. And so I think as Colin and I have been talking about, what does this look like for our teammates? I want to make sure that it's at low cost to my teammates. And so one of the things that we do at Ohio Living is, for example, our health insurance benefits. We all have the same health insurance benefits. So whether it's me as the executive director or one of my receptionists at the front desk, but what we each pay is different. So it's a sliding scale based on wage. And so in those conversations, I think that's kind of where we've been heading, that, I as the executive director can get the same quality childcare as one of my receptionists or one of my housekeepers, but I would be paying at a different level than one of my other teammates. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Sydney.
Yeah.
Kelsey, I was wondering if you could discuss a bit about the broader economic impacts of having strong, high quality childcare infrastructure in Whitehall could have? Or what are your thoughts around, like, what's the reason you're doing this? Because you don't have necessarily direct employees that you're looking to retain in their current role for your organization. What's the driver from your perspective for the city of Whitehall to engage in this conversation?
Yeah, so a big part of my role is making sure that we retain our businesses, and a big part of retaining business is retaining employees. So that's, I think, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We're seeing a lot more top employers taking notes and kind of leaning more into the social services side of things. So when I'm talking to a bunch of businesses and they're saying, well, I have these employees that are having real world struggles, and I care about them now personally because I can tell that they like it here, but they can't afford to work here because of outside stressors, is really disheartening. So that is a great need for me to fill of, okay, well, you do your day-to-day of helping folks and working benefits. Let me see what I can do and make those connections, do a lot of that vetting, right? So I think a lot of the economic impact is kind of indirect, is what we were talking about. Once we eliminate those stressors out of a lot of these families' lives, then it makes them that more productive. I know that we're a lot of overlap here, but it helps with kindergarten readiness, which is another huge concern here in my community. Is the Columbus region gets more and more diverse, and so when we have new Americans or folks that don't have English as a first language and they're bringing their kids into our school systems, how are we setting them up for success in that way and creating that pipeline to keep those families and those students within our districts? So there's a lot that goes into that, but even on like a true actual infrastructure consideration too, all of the driving around, making different stops, I think is can wear on actual infrastructure too, as an aside. But I think a third reason too is we talk about how a lot of grandmothers and grandfathers are stepping up for childcare. What impact could that have on our workforce as well? So if we were to provide childcare, good quality childcare within an employer space that helps the employee with peace of mind, I think it would improve quality of life because the parents are more active in their children's lives. And this could open up opportunities for even those grandparents to enter the workforce in different ways too, kind of diversifying that as well, because you're seeing a lot more active seniors that are wanting to get back into the workforce. So whether that's to meet cost struggles that they have themselves in their lives, or because they're active and they don't care to be fully retired. So I think there's a lot that goes into this that is not just meeting the need of good quality childcare.
Kelsey, I'm curious, are there any current or upcoming initiatives that the city is considering implementing that may help meet the increasing need for childcare among businesses? I know there's a really big push for affordable housing in Whitehall, which we're super excited about, and not directly related, but our affordable housing conversations and partnerships are very excited about what's happening in Whitehall and opportunities to co-locate childcare and affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
But are there initiatives that you could share, and it's okay if not, that are either current or upcoming that the city is considering in the childcare space?
Yeah, so maybe not direct initiatives that we're building. A big thing for me is I want to lean on the experts like the Sprout Fives. Talking to our schools, their big focus right now is kindergarten readiness. They are working to hopefully provide childcare, especially through the summers. We used to have that before the pandemic, but unfortunately weren't able to keep that financial structure up. But our schools are revisiting that. In terms of my initiatives, mine are more boots on the ground, finding folks to eliminate excuses as to why employers couldn't do it. And Sprout 5 is a really great example of that, with how they can retrofit different spaces and different things that they can offer to help fill different gaps. And, you know, if there is a gap that needs filled and we're looking to retain a big business or to attract a big business, what kind of incentives can the city fill for that? And we get very creative in that. It's not a one size fits all structure. There's no formulaic initiative that we're offering at this point, but especially when it comes to attraction efforts, how can we fill that financial gap to meet the overall need of the community? And sometimes that can be something as simple as, you know, we've offered this before, if a user is looking to lease a big space in a building, but there's a user there that isn't as effective, the city may consider buying out that lease to fill that financial gap, to open up opportunities for more community services within that space, or just having different conversations of knowing what the obstacles are and how we can fill them from there. So no direct initiatives per se, but we are always open to helping to fill that financial gap and to eliminate the no's. And a lot of that, again, is vetting really good community partners.
Yeah, where I've been getting excited recently is at the city, state, and federal level, as we are really recognizing that childcare is both a workforce itself, but also supports the workforce that's existing. I think there's been a little bit more appetite and understanding that some dollars that maybe we've restricted to workforce development, or that we've restricted to job access programs in the past, should be considered to be used in some of this upfront costs on the childcare side. So if you talk to any provider or even any business really that's looked at offering on-site childcare, the hesitation from what I've been seeing is really less on the once it's open and running, keeping it going side of things. It's in that upfront side where it's like, okay, how are we going to pay the retrofit the space? How are we going to actually get this up and running? What's the cost needed to meet all these requirements on the health and safety side, which I am not advocating we do away with. I think they're there for a reason, and we should keep those policies in place for the health and safety of kids. But what's, I think, not always understood is, unlike the Department of Education or K-12 initiatives, early childhood doesn't have access to the same funding for starting up. Those startup funds aren't necessarily there. Those capital funds aren't necessarily there. As you all heard a little bit at the beginning of the conversation, Sydney and I are now embarking on that side of things to think about the retrofit of the existing space. And I think that's the barrier for us from a policy standpoint to think about in our conversations, is how can we make dollars available and accessible to businesses who are raising their hand to say, you know what, childcare is important for our workforce. It's going to also add jobs to my campus because there are now teachers that need to be employed, whether directly through the employer or through a partner agency and childcare provider. So we want to make those investments. We want to make it easy to access those funds. And I think that's something we could take at the local, state and federal level to think through. Pulling back just a little bit, Sydney, I'm going to come back to you. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the barriers that childcare has presented to your employees in the past. Obviously, your staff seems to have done a really good job building that ad hoc network of care and making sure that that was there to meet the needs of their families. But how has a lack of consistent childcare impacted performance, morale, attendance, everything and anything else you want to add in there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a direct impact. You know, my teammates, they, you know, some of them have built stronger networks maybe than others, and they have a little bit more reliable support systems when it comes to that. But I think, you know, even the ones who do have a more reliable support system, they're still thinking about it when they come to work, because it's still in the back of their mind that, you know, if something happens, I'm going to get called and I'm going to have to leave work. And so, you know, especially for my frontline caregivers, their job's hard. They are here, they are caring for seniors, and it is not a light task And so to go that whole 12-hour shift with not thinking about your child who is at a neighbor's house or with your parents or with your sister, that's just not realistic. And so, even if they're here putting on, the smile and the care, they're still thinking about it. It's not uncommon for something to happen, child falls ill. And so, they come to the supervisor like, hey, I got to run. Most recently too, I mean, these are real life, struggles. We have a teammate who was relying on a parent for childcare. Parent became unreliable for reasons that are not known to us, but luckily she had a good rapport with her supervisor, came to the supervisor and was like, here's my situation. And the supervisor's like, well, to save you and to retain you from, terming out because of attendance, let's move you to the evening shift for now until we can get you more reliable childcare, and then we can move you back to the day shift. So, I mean, she did reduce her hours a little bit, but moving to a different shift has helped with her attendance, but she's missing out on the full hours that she needed. She does utilize our Coda Bus Pass program, and she's one of the teammates that will come to me and is like, Sydney, when's childcare going to be open? I'm like, if I had a magic wand, it would have been open like 6 months ago. So, that's just one recent example of, how that's impacting our teammates on a day-to-day basis. So.
It's awesome that you have the willingness and flexibility to make those types of accommodations for your teammates. The reality for a lot of employers, though, is there's a point where you can't make those changes. You don't need 22 people on the evening shift, or you have a very hyper-specific role that maybe doesn't necessarily translate to a different shift or a different capacity of work. And I think, well, on one hand, the pandemic has given us a bit of flexibility in terms of what hours look like, how does our work now trickle beyond the traditional 8 to 5. The reality is it's still hard to move shifts and hours. And we deal with that every single day here with Sprout 5. We're essentially a ratio-based employer. So we need a certain number of teachers per kids. And when barriers come up, I can't just flex around like that. Kelsey, I'm wondering, from conversations that you're having with employers, I feel from our conversation, transportation, childcare, housing are bubbling up far more than they did in the past. Are you hearing anecdotes from employers of how it's actually impacting operations or stalling expansion or anything like that? Or is it just the broad, like, oh, we need childcare that's coming up?
Yeah, it's very much that is a huge consideration, but it is not uncommon to the Columbus region. It's not uncommon to Ohio. So although it's a huge concern for sure, and another reason why we're trying to always look for different solutions, it is at least good to know that it's harder to go. It's just as hard to go anywhere else. So from a retention standpoint, it is very urgent, and it's something that is top of mind for me, because that makes Whitehall more attractive to locate your business when you have a community that's able to work with you in that way and to find those resources. But I think that the overall difficulty of working with the employers and outside of what we're seeing with Sydney and her team is, you have the excitement about the opportunity, but why don't we partner with somebody else, or why don't you figure that out for us? It's a little intimidating because, when it comes to their business, they know their business, but it can be a slippery slope to get people on board with. And I think, again, going back to how do we make this as easy as possible? Do we get multiple employers in the room to talk about, putting in money together? And those are other conversations that to facilitate, to make it a little less intimidating for employers to buy into. But yeah. Sydney, I applaud you for all of the work that you've done on your end and your ambition to get this done. What kind of I'm curious to know what kind of buy-in that you had to get from your side and how you were able to have those conversations, because it can be really difficult from, especially the City Point's perspective, being like, this is a huge need for you and your employers. Yeah. But you got to do it. It's not my money. It's not my risk.
And I'm gonna I'm gonna interject here. I think, Cindy, we're gonna ride this all the way out. Let's talk about the slippery slope. Let's go from buy-in and then into the ridiculousness of 3 compartment sinks and
Yeah,
everything else
and
in
the
between.
totally out of left field things that
Yeah.
come up that, you know,
Yeah.
you finally got buy-in from these folks, and then now you
Yeah.
have to work through these issues that you didn't see coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's start, if you don't mind, let's start buy-in, and then we can kind of walk through that entire process that we've been going through at this
Yeah.
point. So we have our HR, we found the need and the demand from employees, we have leadership that is now on board. I think for a lot of employers, there is that level of whether you're the HR department taking it up to your senior leadership, or you're the regional head, but now you have to take it to corporate, which is kind of the structure you had to go through. You had to go to greater Ohio Living because you were only thinking about your location. Let's talk through buy-in. What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I mean, the number one thing I would recommend to other employers who are looking at this, and I mean, Kelsey kind of already hit on this, like we're by no means childcare experts. So I think number one, you find a partner, but you find a partner that like fits your organization. So like when Colin and I first met, I mean, I think there was initially just like this synergy where we were like, no, this could totally work. We're both not for profits. We've both been around for 100 years. Like our missions could totally support each other. And I think that was a huge win, because when I'm going to, you know, my chief operations officer for Ohio Living as a whole, I can say like, I'm not just picking a childcare company because they're like close here and they told me they could do it on campus. Like, here is profile, like here what's what you need to know about them. Here's how our missions are going to kind of align and support each other as we bring this on campus. So from like getting that buy-in perspective, that was kind of where we started. The survey helped. I'm a data nerd, and so I never go to my powers that be without like, here's the facts. So here are the number of open positions I have. Here is what my teammates are saying are barriers. Here's how successful the CODA bus pass program was. We need to do childcare now. And so I think that's important too, not just going with an idea, but going with the data to support that idea as well. So from there, they were like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, I mean, figure out some places on campus that you think it could happen. And so we kind of just like started down that road.
Let's
anything
talk
else I should
through
add
the, no, well, the one thing I was going to ask, because it comes up often, I think Kelsey and I have run into this a few times when having conversations, liability, right? It
Mhm.
comes up a lot. Who's liable? What does that look like? Who's taking on the responsibility? Did you interface with that conversation at all, or was that had with, you know, Ohio Living CEO and the attorney, and they figured
Yeah.
it out and said, yeah, go ahead?
Yeah, no, we definitely talked about it. And you kind of touched on this, Colin. I think, you know, senior living and childcare are two of the most highly regulated industries. So not only are we looking at a liability perspective on our campus, but we're looking from like a regulation standpoint of just like, can we have childcare in a building that's rated for seniors, and everything from your local fire marshal to job and family services to the Ohio Department of Health, like all of those pieces that are important for us to get moving. But yeah, from a liability standpoint, I think, you know, we did talk about it. We do have one of our sister campuses in Cleveland that has a childcare on their campus, and they run it in-house. And so it was not unfamiliar for Ohio Living to like know a little bit or know enough to be dangerous and know enough to be comfortable with us continuing to explore. But I mean, it's definitely going to be a barrier for some employers as they're looking through that. So yeah.
The conversation I like to have with employers is it really depends on how you structure your program. So if we look at Ohio Living, for example, here, it sounds like the sister campus up in Cleveland takes on a pretty hefty load of liability with the childcare employees being in-house to Ohio Living. There's a whole slew of licensure. That campus then took on the operating liability, et cetera, all the things that come with being liable at that point. The partnership that we're etching out at Ohio Living Westminster Thurber really shifts, while there's there's benefit and we're co-locating and our missions align, really it shifts the relationship to Sydney is essentially landlord. So we carry liability for operations, just like any other program childcare facility may open up. There's some things like the sidewalk to the parking lot that are still technically Ohio Living that they'd be liable for. But really the relationship would be the same as a landlord anywhere that your business may be operating off of, doesn't take on all the liability of you operating your business. So it really depends on the type of programming that you want to offer. But Ohio Living is a great example of kind of doing it both ways and which one works out and navigating the liability of each in a highly regulated sector like senior living. Sydney, let's talk about the journey of learning every square inch of your campus and the iterations of space and what we are looking for, what you were thinking was going to be the end outcome, and then where we actually landed.
Yeah. So we're a decent sized campus, but a lot of our campus is vertical. So we're located up here in Neal and Goodale. We've got about 8 acres, and then everything else is just, it goes up. So working through with the Sprout 5 team and learning like what needs childcare was, which is like ground floor, indoor space, outdoor space. We initially kind of identified an area that was going to be really great. It already had its own garden. It's had its own space, just had to take some walls down and do some things. And then, I mean, this kind of plays directly into like why employers should be looking at this, or like what's really driving us here at Ohio Living forward. So we identified that space, we're working on that space. And then in the fall, we made a very bold decision here on our campus to downsize our skilled nursing beds from 128 to 35. And so, I mean, that's a huge shift for our campus. And part of what drove that is decreasing reimbursement in the senior living sector, increasing open positions, because again, the state of Ohio alone lost 15,000 caregivers in senior living from the pandemic. And then all these barriers to employment that we were already working through. And so unfortunately, when that decision was made, it was that part of the building that childcare was going in. And so that part of the building is now slated to be demolished. So I was like, well, we're going to need to look at another space. And so the Sprout 5 team came back out. We were able to identify another space that also ground level, also good, just needs a little bit more renovation. It's actually part of it's my office that I'm sitting in right now. So I will be relocating myself, my assistant and my HR director, but we'll find a space. It's not a big deal, but so yeah, I mean, that took several different conversations over the span of probably 6 months, when I had to call Sprout 5 again and say, hey, sorry, but we just made this really big change and we're going to need to relocate the childcare area. So.
And that there's a lot of flexibility that has to come with these partnerships. And I think that's something that's really important, whether you're on the employer side like Sydney or you're on the connecting side like Kelsey. There's a lot of moving parts. It's good to tap in the partners that know what they're doing in terms of their space and their ecosystem to make things align. Something that I really appreciate about the Ohio Living Westminster Thurber team is they've been really great with my team in terms of just the transparency of, yep, that will work. Nope, that won't. We need to think through this one a little bit more. For the sake of time, because I want to be able to keep opportunities for Q&A at the end, I'll throw a couple more things in there that we've been considering with the Ohio Living Project, and then open it up to, I think I'm turning it back over to Des to open up for questions. But some of the things that we thought through was a lot of intentionality around what is the space at Ohio Living Westminster Thurber, and how do you incorporate things like playgrounds and outdoor play. We've made a transition at Sprout 5 to natural playgrounds and sensory gardens that take into account native plants to Ohio. There aren't big colorful play structures. It's a lot of things like logs and tree cookies and rock forts and all this other really cool stuff. And I think the benefit for employers and our affordable housing partners is it doesn't detract from your campus. It's an added benefit. It adds to the beautification of your campus, and you can, I think, transition that nicely into the existing look and feel and culture of your campus. The other thing is there are some hard and fast rules in childcare: 35 square feet per child, 65 square feet on the outside for the number of kids outdoors. My team has gotten really good at thinking through, we need about 2,500 square feet for 2 classrooms all the way up. Gosh, I think Kelsey, we talked about programs as big as 15, 20,000 square feet and how many rooms can you fit in there. But it's important to know or find a partner that knows those licensing requirements so your project isn't dead on arrival from the beginning. And then the other thing that we add in, and I think it has to do with the mission component that Cindy and I are both excited about, why the mission's aligned, but something we like to take into account is how do you use childcare to be a good corporate citizen? And after caring for your employees' childcare needs, how do you say, I'm also willing to open this up to the broader community so my business, my place of employment can have a strong relationship with the neighborhoods that we're serving and we're working in. And I would advocate, regardless of who the childcare provider is, if you do that in-house or find a partner, I would advocate there's such a demand for childcare right now. A really easy, low stakes way to be a good corporate citizen would be to open up that childcare space and say, hey, let's build this just a little bit larger than what the demand of employees are going to be so that we can provide care, even if it's traditional exchange of dollar care, but they can become one with your corporate campus. If there are any closing thoughts that Sydney or Kelsey want to add in, I will kind of turn it over to you all. And then if not, Des, I'll let you take it from here. Sorry we ran a little bit over, but I was enjoying the conversation.
Well, thanks, Colin. At the end of the day, if there are no questions, I've asked folks to place their questions in the chat box here. However, I always have a bunch of questions, and Don does as well. So we won't have any shortage on questions. And so I will ask the first question, and then I have a slew of others. But if other folks have questions, please chime in. But Cindy, you mentioned flexibility when you're talking about non-traditional hours or an employer changing up hours to accommodate the workforce that they have. Can you speak more, and this is to the three of you, can you speak more to the flexibility employers should have or take into consideration when it comes to providing or helping, with their workforce in their workforce child care situation?
Absolutely. So I mean, and I think Kelsey, I think, spoke on this too. Like some employers, it's going to be difficult. And so I think each employer is going to have to look at what flexibility they can do. For example, there are some things that I can't be flexible. I mean, we've got 12-hour shifts for direct caregivers. I need a certain number of direct caregivers per patient. So it gets a little bit difficult depending on which department someone might be in and what position they hold. But I think the more you can know your teammates, and the more that you build that rapport where they can share their personal challenges with you as their supervisor, and there's that transparency and there's that trust that's built, then you as the employer or the supervisor can then try to get creative. And I think that's really kind of where we're at for employers right now. Like we have to be creative. And we have to still be in our box that whatever regulating industry or entity is giving us, but how can we play in that box? And how can we play to each teammate in that box? But I always tell my teammates as we're first meeting, like, I don't know what I don't know. And so to your comfort level, the more you can share with me, with your supervisor, the better we're going to be able to support you, because we'll have a better understanding.
The thing that I'll add in, for entities that are heavily regulated, like childcare, healthcare, there are a lot of things that I've been learning when working with employees and the accommodations that we make that we thought were rules and regulations that maybe weren't. And to dig in a little bit, or to ask, in our case, a licensing specialist, or to ask someone at JFS, because that's our licensing and accreditation body, like, hey, can I actually do this? So for us, the 4-day 410s, 4 10-hour days for a work week, I was under the impression for a very long time to work with licensure or Step Up the Quality, which is our rating system, and come to find out you can do it. It's a little bit more work, but it can actually happen. So I think like Sydney mentioned there, we don't know what we don't know, both from the employee perspective, but also like, are we 100% sure that that's actually a hard and fast rule that we have to follow, or is there some flexibility here that we can do if it means we can keep an employee on staff?
Thank you for that. So, we have, folks that have expressed interest in potentially providing childcare services for their employees on their respective campus or on site, as you all say. Can you give me a high level rundown of what it would take for me as an employer to provide childcare services for my respective employees, and then potentially allowing folks in the community to also be provided those same services?
I think I can start with
So,
that one.
go ahead, Kelsey.
Just because I know I have to hop off here, but I think bias. Reach out to your communities. There might already be an initiative in place, and if not, maybe there could be an economic development, or your chamber might already be engaging businesses in this way. And like we said, this is a big thing for one business to take on, so it has to be a special kind of employer that's able to do this. So if there's already a network of employers that are interested in doing something and being part of the solution, but might not be able to head the solution, there might be some efforts of clustering that and trying to get that together. Chances are your community or your community chamber is already trying to figure out a solution to this. So I would definitely reach out and engage, and also kind of pick their brains about different opportunities with variances when it comes to retrofitting and things of that nature. I know that my community, knowing what a big need this is, if looking and finding those right partners, those make sense partners for quality childcare, there might be some ability to flex those rules a little bit, whether that's with parking, whether that's with the play areas or the amount of space needed. Again, as long as we know and we vet the partners well, there's a good chance that there's some opportunities. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the chamber, thank Spectrum too, for this opportunity. Thank you, Colin, for asking me to be part of this. Hopefully we can give my contact information out. I'd love to talk to different people about how I've been able to do this in not just this community, but in past communities as well. So thank you again. I appreciate the time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Thanks, Kelsey. From the actual nuts and bolts side of how you do this at the highest level, and Sydney, you can jump in if your perspective is different from the partner side of things, but I would say conversations should look pretty aligned to the template that we use here. So first, employer should do some work identifying if there's need and demand. From there, typically where we'll have conversations is we'll go back and forth and see if we're a good fit as a partner. The reality is every childcare provider is not going to be able to offer the same services. Every childcare provider is not going to be the same fit, because you're working with kids and families. It's kind of like dating. You really want to make sure partners on both ends are going to have aligned mission, aligned values. And then when we're actually getting into the planning side of things, the conversations that we have are, where are you looking for square footage, or how many employees do you have that you think might need care on a year-over-year basis? Because what we don't want to do is build 100 slots worth of childcare if you're only going to put 5 into that space. Or on the flip side, we don't want to say, oh, you have 2,000 square feet, but you have 60 employees that need childcare, and now you're creating competition, demand, and some frustration amongst team members and who gets care. So we'll have those conversations, take a look, think about things like, is it ground floor? Is there egress? Where might play space be, or where may there be a park that we could utilize as the outdoor play space? And then once you have the nuts and bolts and planning down, it really goes into construction and build out. Like, it truly is that simple of a process. I'd say there's 3 to 6 months worth of pre-construction work where you're doing the planning side of things. Then construction, the capital side, is going to take as long as that takes. And then on the, you have a warm shell, you have your flooring, your walls, getting your fixtures, furnishing, and equipment in there is going to take somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks. So depending on how fast you could get that to go, you could have a program open in, 4 to 6 months. It could take a couple of years or so, but it really depends on what space you have available to you. And if you find the right partner who's equipped in retrofitting space and knows the ins and outs of licensure, it should be a fairly easy lift, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you. Cindy, anything to add on that? No? Okay. So this is my last question. Housing, transportation, and childcare. Those are the really big issues that have hit this region and some of the issues and matters that we're focusing here at the Chamber. Can you both talk about, things that you're seeing, as this is becoming more and more of a topic of discussion, things that you all are seeing as it relates to what the private sector is doing and what government entities, state, local, federal entities are doing to really promote, childcare and the funding and making it more affordable for folks in the region and even around the country.
Yeah, so I'll start, and then Sydney, I'll let you finish up here. I think now we're at a point where housing, childcare, transportation are not just things that we talk about. I think we're finally reaching a point where there's going to have to be action if we want to reignite the workforce and we want to pull folks back into the workplace that are either not fully employed, whether they're underemployed, or choosing to sit out of the workforce altogether. I think there are shifts that we need to be considering, and people are becoming more and more, from the policy perspective, receptive to around de-siloing some of these fundings. So for example, there's a push at HUD right now where if you're going for affordable housing dollars and you're going to build your funding stack there, if you add childcare in as a component, you have a multiplier added to your applications that you can then go ahead and be a bit more competitive by bringing childcare into housing. I know there are conversations around creating transportation hubs that also incorporate things in like shared services, food, childcare, and hopefully those projects are seen as even more important than just focusing on the housing or the transportation alone. I think there's still work we could be doing in terms of making childcare affordable. I'll be frank and transparent in that we've had to, for the first time since the pandemic, increase tuition this past year. And it's not because I'm looking to become incredibly wealthy off of childcare. It's because rent has still gone up. Cost of diapers are up like 20%. And we've made a commitment to paying our employees what they're worth and what they deserve. And the public policy hasn't necessarily caught up to those shifts. But if we want a robust childcare infrastructure, we have to recognize, unlike transportation, where infrastructure are the buses, or unlike food, where food is the actual program, and childcare, the program is the educator, the person that's actually doing the care and taking care of the kiddos. So I think there's still work that we can be doing, but I am seeing at the state and at the federal level and the local levels across the greater Columbus region, this buckling down and saying, you know what, we need to make sure that this is not a barrier if we want our region to continue to grow, thrive, and prosper. If we're going to keep attracting these major employers, we have to make commitments to housing, transportation, and childcare. Sydney, I'll let you do kind of the closing thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a need. I can only speak for kind of, what Ohio Living is experiencing. But I think one of the things that I've noticed, so from January to, last week, I think I've had 8 different teammates come to me with eviction notices. And so being a not-for-profit, I'm very fortunate that we have a strong culture of philanthropy, and I've been able to help these teammates, catch up on their rent and avoid that formal eviction. But that's just a temporary fix. I'm just catching up what they fell behind on. Likely they're going to fall behind again, and the landlord might not be as accommodating next time, or might not be able to support them to continue to live there. But one of the things I noticed with my teammates is a lot of them don't even know maybe some of the government programs here in Columbus that they might qualify for. And I'm by no means an expert. I've just over the last couple of years tried to educate myself so that I can support my teammates. But that's one thing that we've started talking about is basically like some sort of like care navigator position for our teammates that we can bring here on campus on a part-time, maybe full-time basis that is connected with maybe what the city of Columbus is doing, what the state of Ohio is doing, what the federal government's doing, and what different programs my teammates might qualify for. Because I think, you know, they are at that bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. They don't have the capacity to research that, you know, they could get a discount on their Columbia gas bill or that they could qualify for this government program. And so I think definitely it's just us talking about it right now, but I think that would be something that we at Ohio Living here are looking at just to further support our teammates and getting connected here in the region. So.
Well, thank you both, and thank you all for this discussion. It's definitely one of many that need to continue to happen as it relates to the business community. And so, thank you for you all's wise words, insights, perspectives. Much truly appreciate that. So, at the end of the day, I'm going to get back to the script. But thank you to our moderator and our panelists for their knowledge and participation in this morning's Government Spotlight program. If you enjoyed today's program and would like to revisit the conversation at a later date, be sure to keep an eye out on your email. You should receive a link to the recorded program within the next 24 hours. On behalf of the Columbus Chamber, we want to thank you for your support of our Government Spotlight series. We look forward to providing relevant and insightful programming to you in the future. Please be sure to visit the Columbus Chamber website at columbus.org/events for more events like this one. We hope to see you all again soon. Thanks, everybody.